This is Religion and Theology, a podcast from the Center for Theology and Religious Studies. Since 2018, the research project Integration and Tradition, the making of the Syriac Orthodox Church in Sweden, has been ongoing. In a brief series of episodes, the main concluding conference on the project will be broadcasted on Religion and Theology, with a focus on presenting and discussing its results. In this episode, we will get an introduction and overall presentation to the project by the project leader Magdalena Nordin of Gothenburg University. Nordin will talk on the topic of the making of the Syriac Orthodox Church in Sweden. Following the presentation, Dr. Katarina Westerlund from Uppsala University will offer reflections on Nordin's talk.
Very welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you could come to our end of a project conference. And we have the headings that we're going to present results, but these are not results, result. We haven't published these results yet. So we're really happy that you can come and give us some comments and reflect on what we're trying to say or could be results. I will make a short presentation of the research project overall. And then Katarina Westerlund, who is Associate Professor at Uppsala University, will give a comment on that from the parallel research project that's been going on for the same time about international Pentecostal or charismatic congregations in the Stockholm area. So we'll see if there are things that we can learn from each other. So, just shortly about the project, Integration and Tradition, the making of the Syriac Orthodox Church in Sweden. So it was a 4-year research project that we managed to have the right to extend to 5 years. So we've been 4 researchers, and I think that was when we applied for this project, we constructed a research group with 2 researchers that were more contemporary, and then we joined with 2 researchers who had the tradition, the knowledge of the tradition and the historical knowledge of the church. And I think that was for me at least, and I think for the whole group, it has been very, very helpful to have the knowledge from us doing research, contemporary research, knowing the ethnographic methods that we were working with, and then having those who knew about the church and the tradition of the church. So that was really, and I think that's also not that common, these type of research projects, that you combine contemporary researchers with and also have the in-depth knowledge of the church. So I think that have been working out really, really good. So why did we start this research project? But one of the reasons was that there has been studies done in Sweden about the group, the Syrians in Sweden, where they touched upon the church and how the group in Sweden, the history of the group in Sweden, and how that related to the church. But there hasn't been any research done on the church itself in Sweden. And it's a 50 years history, so it's a modern history and it's a Swedish church. So, and also it's important to do it now, and I think we're sometimes a little too late, because those who were the first one establishing the church, they don't live anymore, and all the things that happened then was not archived totally. I have small archives, and Henrik can try to find them. But to talk to these people, we must do it now, because it's too late soon, and then it's a story told to the second generation, and you know what happened when histories go further. So it was really needed to do this research, because we didn't know anything about the church. And I will just say something about how has research on migration and religion been done before. because there is also lack of looking into traditions. So there's been on transnational migration, globalization, processes, and diaspora. So this broad picture we have, kind of a lot of research done. Also religion related to other social structures. So we have the religions, but it's kind of not in-depth into the religions. It's more kind of how they relate to other social structures. And also kind of about the religious organizations and their relation to the receiving countries. And the qualitative research done, it's been kind of how religion works for people or the congregations, how they kind of group belonging. It's been on social functions of the religious organizations. How can they help a person, for example, in a migrant situation? And also kind of this how religion has positive aspects of religion, and it's a part of a migration history, a migration situation. So these we find in qualitative research. And if we go to quantitative research, it's very much about on an individual level on religiosity. And it's, as you know, aware of, it's very difficult to kind of measure how religion change or religiosity change. But there are some research done and some tries. But what we don't have is about religious traditions in relation to migration. In-depth studies, they're coming. Sarah is doing it, and some of them are upcoming. But in the process, there's very, very little done. Looking to inside the churches or the religious denominations, what happened with the traditions? How do they change, and how do that relate to the society where they now are? And if I have just finished written a book with my colleague Jonas Otterbeck about migration and religion. So if you don't, you can go and see there that there is nothing really about tradition yet, but it's an overview of the research done since the 15th of religion and migration in Western Europe. Can you read? It's quite bright here, but yeah. So, what did we want to do then in this study? Well, we wanted to study in which ways the Syriac Orthodox congregations been integrated into society. And then with the tradition in focus then, how has this been negotiated, changed and upheld in relation to process of integration. So we haven't kind of studied integration in this classical economical or political science sense that are they integrated due to their vote or their income or whatever. It's the processes, how do you change, for what reason, what is not seen to be changeable. The Syriac Orthodox Church has a narrative, a tradition of being an old church with old traditions that have been the same for a lot of years. And of course, that's also true, but there are also changes going on. So we thought that it would be interesting to look into a church with this strong idea of strong traditions and how they could change and the processes behind these changes or not changes. And then we had 4 themes that we started to to capture this idea: organization, leadership, liturgical celebrations, and teaching. And we will touch upon some of these in our presentations these days. And integration, we have tried to the concept to making it possible to analyze. We tried with talking about external integration and internal integration. So external integration is in a way outlooking from the congregations, from parishes, and outlooking. How do they these members, how the ideas, tradition, regulation, and norms of behavior relates to then other institutions. So is there a interconnectedness between other institutions in the society? So from the congregation and outlooking. So that's the perspective we worked with. And then as from Breton, the institutional incorporation of the religion itself into the cultural institutional fabric of the larger society. So putting the church in the rest of society and see how it meets, mostly from the congregation and outwards. Next project will be from the rest of the society and to the churches maybe, but we haven't done that in this project. And then we looked into internal integration, so what is going on with the traditions inside the churches, the parishes that we studied. How have they kind of changed and been reinterpreted and so on. So that's kind of the overall idea. And I'll just give you a very kind of way to understand this, that the congregations are kind of a part of a church, a Syriac Orthodox Church. The members are part of the congregation, and they are part of Sweden, and they're kind of part of an overall global, transnational situation. So it's kind of a lot of things, but our center is the congregations. So that's also quite new when doing religion and migration studies, that kind of keep the parishes, the congregation as in focus. So how are all these things interconnected? So that's the background. So what did we do? Well, we were lucky enough, it's always the COVID question, we were lucky enough to be finishing our fieldwork when COVID came. We had just one fieldwork package that we want to do. That was Easter 2020 that we had to kind of skip. But we had a lot of material gathered before that. So we were really, in that sense, lucky. We could sit back home and then do the analysis of all the material, and COVID would just pass by. It wasn't that easy, but more or less. The focus has been on 3 congregations in Sweden. We try to keep these congregations anonymous so that we could have people to speak openly and tell what's going on in the congregations, not being kind of afraid that this was be known. Of course, in the long run, and the congregation, of course, know that we've been there. but we won't kind of mention. So if you ask, we won't tell. Not even during dinner tonight. We won't tell you what congregation's about. Yes? Yeah? Andreas, you?
No.
I won't say anything. And we did in-depth semi-structured interviews. So we went to the congregations. We had an agreement with the congregation even before we got the research project that we were welcome to come there. So we had contacts with them, and they had said it's okay that we come. That was agreed upon with the board of the congregations, the parishes, and with the priest of the parishes. So they knew that we were trying to get research funding to do this research, and they really helped us in all the way they could be. We were welcome, and we could come and go as we wanted, really, in these congregations. So we could do interviews with different people in the congregations, just ordinary lay people, with people with the priests, with the choir, with the deacons, youth groups, whatever we kind of thought was of interest. So we did also observations. We stayed there. We went to a lot of liturgies and realized that as everyone else was recording during the liturgy, we asked if it was okay for us also to do so, and that was okay. So we have also recordings, which then, of course, for ethical reason, only the 4 of us in the research group will look into, and we have watched a lot of recordings. And then we have written documentary material. We realized after a while that it was difficult for us to see if these 3 congregations were typical or atypical. Is this kind of a typical congregation, Syriac Orthodox congregation in Sweden, or is it kind of totally things going on here? It says nothing about what's going on in the rest of the church. So we decided to do archival material. That's what I'll come back to. But we did a survey with help from the dioceses, with help from research assistant Charlotte Oinas, who will come tomorrow. So we sent it out a survey to all the congregations in Sweden, 54 questions, and we got back a lot of answers, and that's been very helpful material to have. And we're really, really happy that they managed to answer all these very tricky questions. I don't know why we made 54 questions, but we got so many answers, and we're really glad. And then we also made an archival material that Henrik mostly looked into to have background history to see what happened before. So we ended up with 78 interviews. That was mostly individual interviews, but also some couples that we interview, and in some cases as group interviews. We have 83 observations, and then we have photos, sound recordings, and other material gathered. So it was kind of field work, being there, doing interviews, doing observations. And then we have film with picture recordings from 32 gatherings. It's about 50 hours of recordings. And it's been really helpful to have these recordings. You can go into depth, you can look, and then you can go back and look again and look again and look again and see what all things going on in these congregations. And we sit in the back, so we do see people, but in the same sense they can be kind of anonymous, but we don't know who they are in many cases. But that's been helpful. And then written documentary material. I'll just shortly say something about the church. There's a few of you that may be not familiar with the church in Sweden or with the church in general. It's a church that is kind of a diasporic church by now. And Sweden has, from the diasporic group, is one of the largest group, even if it's not that many people, it's at least one of the largest Christian minorities churches in Sweden, and from the Oriental and the East churches is the largest one. And then it's spread from different parts. We have the photo up to the right is from Linköping in Sweden. The one here in the bottom is from the Netherlands, from Hengelo, which is also kind of a center for the Syriac Orthodox Church in Europe. Santa Maria Church there. And then the Syriac Orthodox Church in Sweden. We have the monastery up to the left, and then we have the two cathedrals in Södertälje that most of you are familiar with. The group has been here since the late 60s. Churches, as Henrik will maybe mention more about that, started in the 1970s. 48 congregation, about 45,000 members. So I have to keep the differences between members and being part of the church. One of the most important countries for the church in the world. Maybe we can discuss that during these days, but it's a well-established church in Sweden and known kind of in the rest of the world. Tumultuous process of change, the two dioceses, which kind of, I think, say something about the church in Sweden in comparison, for example, to the Netherlands, where it can kind of, I think it's a little different, maybe due to this. And then the monastery that you have on the photo there from 2019, I think today 3 monks living there, or 4. So it's quite new. The church is not, you don't find the church in whole of Sweden. We have this kind of area where all the congregate parishes are found between Stockholm and Gothenburg. And then you have Södertälje as its center, I would say, and the monastery close there to Stockholm. So you have to be aware that this is not a all over Sweden church. It's there where you find it, more or less. Maybe I missed something in this map, but it's not in the whole country. So I will just give you, still have some time, I'll just give you some glimpse from the survey that we did then. So this is the general results about the church, and then on the presentations that you will have will be more from the 3 congregations that we studied. This 45 questions. So from the survey, we have the largest Syriac congregations here. So members, St. Ephraim, St. Jacob, the ones in Södertälje are the largest one. And then in a falling scale, Örebro, which is also an early one. You have the different churches and where they also were established according to themselves. So they are kind of large churches as the one in Södertälje. In the survey we also had a question about church building. So we have the churches in the churches, churches in the church, and half of them, more or less, has their own church, which is also almost half of them been constructed, and the others have been rebuilt. And then we have 16 parishes that rent the church and one that borrows it. So it's both, and I think it's influences if you have your own church or if you borrow a church, how you live your parish life and how you can kind of construct the congregation. I think it's a strong influence on that. Another important area is kind of the priest in the church and the education and the upholding of the priest in the church. So from the survey we know that 36 congregations have their own priests. So the other borrows priests from other congregations. The largest congregations have 2 priests. So it's kind of congregations without priests and congregations with 2 priests, so they differ. Then we have some of them are full employed as priests, but many of them work part-time as priests and then have other occupations at the side, which also, of course, make it different for the parish if you have a priest that's always there and work for the church, or if you have a priest that can be there sometimes but not always. 3 of the priests in Sweden have a theological training in Sweden, and I'll just show you where the other come from. So most of them have their theological training in the Middle East, some in Europe, probably in Salzburg, some of them. They have kind of ongoing and newly achieved religious training, so it's not kind of that they have training back there, but it's kind of ongoing and it's newly achieved training. And I think I skip the next one and we go further with I'll just before I let Katarina in to comment, I will just give you an example. I think it's coming up to Christmas and Lucia, and I will just give you a little example from the research, and this will be sound, so you will just hear I think this is a nice example of traditions going on in the church. It's the same happening, and you will get 2 sounds from there, hopefully, if technique works. Some recognize this, not everyone. And then we'll see if we listen to this one. Oh, I maybe have to stop them. Oh. No, I have both now. Okay, no, it stopped. So, thank you for listening, and welcome Katarina, who will say something if we can compare these churches at all.
My name is Katarina Westerlund. I'm associate professor in Uppsala University in practical theology. And I'm very happy to be invited here and being able to give some comments on Magdalena's first presentation. I think, or I know, that the reason I'm here is because I'm leading a parallel project, so to say, that's focusing on Pentecostal migrants in the greater Stockholm area. So I will give some background from that project so that you get a grip on that project and say something about similarities, differences, and perhaps challenges that we see ahead from our project. We are not really finishing, but almost in the process of wrapping up and trying to write and so on. So I see this as an opportunity to reflect on similarities and differences that we might be able to write upon and present results from later on, because Magdalena is also part of my project on a small percentage, but that's really great to have that within the project, so to say. So some background about the project. It's called Pentecostal Migrants in Secular Sweden, Influences and Challenges. And it's really about increasing the knowledge about these groups in the greater Stockholm area. As you might know, those kind of churches or groups for the Pentecostal with international background is growing in the larger cities in Europe, in London, Paris, Stockholm, Copenhagen, and so on. So we created this project in order to gain knowledge of a field that we really didn't know very much about, really a new landscape emerging. And we are from different, in the project, we are six participants in the project coming from different disciplines, even more diverse than yours. It's practical theology, sociology, religion, anthropology, law, and church history. So we have quite a multidisciplinary group, and I will say something about that in the end as well, because I think that is important. As a background, as I said, there is a new landscape that we don't know very much about. In the greater Stockholm area, 33% of the population have international background, meaning that one or two of the parents, or the people themselves, of course, are born outside Sweden. So 33%. And when it comes to those international or migrant Pentecostal churches, groups, whatever you call them, they have grown till there are 100 churches after 2000 that has sort of been established during the last two decades. 200 new groups during those 20 years. That's really amazing. They are small, some of them, and some of them are larger. They come from different parts of the world, and some are merging from different countries. Actually, in the project, we have been mapping the landscape in the greater Stockholm area. There's a report in Swedish about that. But we also been studying especially 3 of those churches. One Arabic-speaking, with members from different countries in the Arabic region. One African, so to say, from different African countries where they speak English. And one Latin American church where they speak Spanish from different Latin American countries. And one remark about that is really that the language is extremely important for these groups. They sort of gather around language. And some of the informants that really told me that it matters so much to be able to worship in their own language, that language of the heart. So that's really important. And I think that's a difference when you sort of compare to perhaps London, because their English is that you know English if you live there and been living there for some years. So they don't worship that much in their sort of foreign or original languages as they do in a country like Sweden, where it takes time to learn Swedish. So that's really important to note, I think. I will say something about history. I also was really talking about language, nationality and language. I think is interesting when I try to compare these two projects. Firstly, the question of history. You said, Magdalena, it was the Syriac Orthodox Church has been in Sweden for 50 years. But when I look at it, it's a church that has been established on the 5th century and has a long tradition compared to the Pentecostals. That's from 19th, 20th century. And I have a Swedish history, and then the new international or Pentecostal migrants came to Sweden on the same period as you mentioned, the Finns and Romas. And then in the last 20, 30 years, they've come from different parts of the world. So it's a short history and not that long traditional church background. And that, I think, is very important when you compare. And we also noted during coffee that we just started to think about the choirs. A traditional old church like the Syriac Orthodox has traditional choirs with women singing, but in these Pentecostal churches you don't have that kind of choirs at all. I haven't really thought about that. They have musicians and a band playing, but then everyone is singing. So there's a big difference, and I think that's something you could look further upon. So if you look at the Pentecostal churches, you can see when it comes to integration that that foreign, so to say, people that came from Finland, and then you got Romas from Poland and Finland as well. And the integration of these new Pentecostal migrants that we study sort of follow the same line of integration like with the Finnish and the Roma. So it's really interesting to see what happened with the first that came, and how will the churches or congregations act when they meet new migrants, new people coming into the churches. So we can see a trajectory there from the Finnish and Roma that came first, and now the large groups coming from all over the world. So that's really a way to look and see what's happening when they enter. And as I mentioned, the nationality and language is really, really important. And there, I think we could look upon more things about that, depending on what nationality they have from origin and what language they are sort of united when they come here. And the Arabic Church is very, very special in that respect. You have people from Iran, Egypt, Syria, a lot of countries down there, and everything is done in Arabic. And the Latin American is from different Latin American countries, and they've had longer history in Sweden, so there are differences when they entered Sweden as well. And the African Church, where everything is done in English, they also attract people from Asia, India, and other countries. So the language is really, really important in order to form the group and what's happening. And also the African Church, that sort of is where everything is conducted in English. They have a lot of international contacts with global churches and that kind of international sister organizations all over the world. So that's really will influence what's happening, the language, and how they sort of relate nationality. I think also when it's come to family and tradition and the relation to society, we have both similarities and differences. We can see in our project, I suppose we will hear about that later on in these presentations that there are negotiations when it comes to family values, when it comes to gender equality and that kind of values that we are supposed to support in Sweden. And we also have a system of state regulations where you sort of could be accredited a faith-based organization and get money from the state, and then you have to adhere to some equality and democratic values. So that's a way for the Swedish state sort of to influence or try to teach these new migrants or people coming to Sweden that you have sort of to adhere to gender equality, democracy, mainly those kind of values. And that's been reinforced during the last perhaps 10 years in Sweden, that they pose these kind of demands on these groups, which means for the groups that I study, that they choose sometimes not to be part of that system and apply for funding. So that's really something they have to sort of take into account when they want to be established within the Swedish system. And also when it comes to child rearing, public schools, the work and employment systems, there's a lot of issues going on in these groups. And I think that's something we could look upon more thoroughly, where the congregations works as an sort of extended family that gives security, stability, and also practical support in the negotiations with the Swedish society and the state, where the newcomers don't really understand the system, don't know where to go to, how to take part in public welfare, medical care, and so on. So there's a lot of practical support as well as spiritual within the congregation or the church. That's really, really important. And I think there we could find also similarities and also differences, I think, when it comes to tradition and the time spent in the country. That I think is really important. Yeah, I think I will wrap it up. And three things that I would like to end upon, and one is that we in our project have found a double sort of discrimination. At least my fieldwork has shown that among these Pentecostal groups, both their ethnicity and their too much Christianity is sort of not well seen in Sweden. The Swedes don't really understand them as they describe it, and they feel sort of discriminated or meet discrimination, both due to the color of the skin or the way they speak, and due to their religiosity. And that's really tough. So that's really something I think I will at least want to look further upon when it comes to those double situation where you can't really be a person of faith as you want to, and you also have your background to struggle with. And then I think we started out with labeling this as Pentecostal migrants. Now we talk about international Pentecostals. And that's due to the fact that they don't come from one country and end up in Sweden. They move from one country to another country and come to Sweden and want to move on to another country, perhaps back to their country of origin. So it's a lot of international fluidity. They also have an international identity, so to say, by their church belonging to an international church. So that's also kind of international bond, so to say. So we don't any longer talk about migrants, but we talk about international Pentecostals instead, because that's really, really a better way of labeling this. And that's also been a result from our multidisciplinary discussions. In the beginning, we just found that we couldn't talk to each other, but now we ended up as talking about international migrants, especially the law woman. She couldn't really talk about migrants because that in law it has a very specific meaning. So it's really about finding a terminology that works, also multidisciplinary. So, but nevertheless, it also talks about this process, fluidity, not only moving between countries, but changing identities or the negotiations going on. So the fluidity, the mobility, the process, I think is fruitful to use as a metaphor and investigate further in. And then I think the multidisciplinarity then is really, really important. And I think the law has been very important for us, but I lacked political science or that kind of viewing about the state, and not least in Sweden nowadays when we have a new government that will sort of, or at least tries to make more restrictions for migrations and stuff like that. I think the political side is really, really, really important when you will study this, because they will, at least they say that there will be changes in the state regulations and so on. So the multidisciplinarity, the international fluidity, and the double discrimination is something that I at least would like to think about further. Yeah, thank you.